Central Bank welcome this as part of a normal...
Financial experts in their numbers at a public hearing on the Central Bank of Nigeria Amendment Bill. The Senate is seeking contributions from the public, particularly those in the financial sector, to amend some aspects of the CBN Act. One of the areas which the Senate is planning to amend is to divest the CBN board of the power to approve its budget. But the CBN governor argued that taking away the financial autonomy of the bank would increase investors' perception of risk in the banking sector and reduce the overall confidence in Nigerian banks.
Subjecting the budget of the central bank to approval of Parliament, which will make it the only central bank in the world that I know of that does this, would unduly constrain the financial independence of the bank and limit our ability to perform our roles. And we therefore think that we should focus on making use of the existing structures and making them more effective.
But members of the committee argued that the Fiscal Responsibility Act makes it imperative for the CBN to submit its budget to the National Assembly for appropriation. Standing his ground, the CBN governor said the CBN has always complied with the Fiscal Responsibility Act.
Why are you objecting to this budget? It's an annual event. Above all, of course, if your law says it, we have another Fiscal Responsibility Act. We have come with it, and we made mention of all the institutions that we thought are qualified or are required to submit their budget.
The Act requires that we attach, in fact, it does not even require us. It requires the President to cause the bill to be presented and for these to be attached. And we send our estimates as required by the Act every year to finance for attachment.
Former governor of CBN and a representative of the organized labor also believe that the CBN Act should be left as it is.
My own view in coming here is to ensure that you do not unnecessarily tamper with what is working.
None of these policies will be taken serious if they don't flow from the independence and autonomy of a CBN that is seen to own up to its own policy.
With many financial experts supporting the autonomy of the CBN, it is unclear what the position of the Senate will be on its plan to amend the CBN Act. Linda Kibe, Channels Television News.
As at December 2004, Nigeria owed a total of $35.9 billion, an equivalent of 4.82 trillion naira at 134 naira exchange rate to the dollar. That debt portfolio, containing largely of the Paris Club, was reduced to $18 billion via a relief package that was implemented on June 29, 2005, under the Obasanjo's administration. Nearly 15 years on, Nigeria today has a higher debt portfolio of $81 billion, an equivalent of 25.7 trillion naira at 360 naira exchange rate to the US dollar. In the past 8 years, Nigeria's debt increased by 128%, with servicing accounting for nearly 50% of the country's revenue, according to October 2019 IMF report. In budget 2020, Nigeria will sink 2.45 trillion naira into debt servicing, and more borrowing is on the way next year via the World Bank. Economists and analysts are seriously worried.
If we are to generate approximately 2.5 trillion naira from crude oil, and we are to spend approximately 2.5 trillion naira to service debt, what it means is that all again a major source of revenue, which perhaps is almost sure will be taking it from crude oil and will be sinking it into debt.
Government officials, however, maintained a different stance on debt portfolio. Nigeria is not in debt crisis, but a revenue problem, says the country's minister in charge of finance, budget and national planning.
Nigeria does not have a debt crisis. Our total borrowing today is just under 20% of our GDP, while the multilateral institutions project for an economy our size to borrow up to 50 to 55% of our GDP. What we have is a revenue problem.
Nigeria is going through a rough patch, at least since global oil price crashed in 2014. Since May 2015, President Buhari's administration has been borrowing home and abroad for the current expenditure in rapid road, rail and other infrastructure, as well as debt financing. The country's revenue is, however, not growing at the same pace, pushing the government into a fiscal deficit financed by expensive borrowing from the central bank and other sources. In the first half of 2019, Nigeria's current account turned into a deficit. Gross reserves now around $40 billion US. At the just concluded World Bank IMF meetings in Washington, Nigeria was advised on how to rebalance its debt.
Interest payments are particularly high. It's because the denominator is incredibly low. Nigeria has one of the lowest tax ratios in the world.
As Nigeria struggles to shore up its revenue portfolio by way of higher taxes and expansion of the tax bracket, including other creative sources, the country's expenditure is expanding to include new higher minimum wage, petrol subsidy, among other things. Balancing the country's fiscal imbalance will require more than the current policy thrust, says the IMF in its October report on Nigeria. The debt clock is ticking for the administration. Bosin Damofaye, Channels Television News.
All right, welcome back. This is still 2019, end of a decade. We're done with economy and now we'll be delving into security and how that fared throughout the decade. We have in the studio, Lagos studio right here, we have Mrs. Tanwa Ashiru. She's a security and defense analyst. We also have a retired Colonel Yomi Dari, the security expert. And in our studios in Kano, we have Habu Sani, as a commissioner of police in Kano. And of course, we'll be heading to Abuja also, where we have Joshua Alobo, who is the president, Human Rights Development Center. Thank you all for joining us on this segment. We'll be talking security.
Absolutely. Now, let's take you down memory lane. Now, what began as a ragtag group of religious fundamentalists in northern Nigeria evolved into the nation's most fearsome security challenge during the decade. Well, it was believed that security services had neutralized the Borno-based Boko Haram group with the killing of its leader, that's Mohammed Yusuf, as far back as July 2009.
That's true. But the group actually survived, reinventing itself under the leadership of Abubakar Shekau, even became deadlier, rampaging through almost all the states of northern Nigeria. Even in the nation's capital, Abuja, it felt the rage of the insurgents on August the 27th, 2011, where they targeted the international community. That sad event took 18 lives in a suicide car bombing at the United Nations headquarters in Abuja. The powerful blast destroyed lower floors of the building and it injured dozens of its occupants.
It was around 11 a.m. local time when the news hit like a shockwave. A bomb blast that rocked the United Nations building in Abuja, the federal capital. The emergency services, medics, the police and the fire service all reacted swiftly and converged on the scene to carry out rescue operations. At the premises of the United Nations compound, occupants of the building who had escaped relatively unharmed were still in a daze. Some were grief-stricken at the realization that they had lost friends and colleagues in the explosion. An eyewitness said the blast struck like a bolt out of the blue.
I just heard a loud bang and the building fell on top of me. And I stepped out of the building, stepped out of the bathroom where I was. And my colleagues that I had been talking to only a minute ago, I couldn't recognize them. They were all covered in blood.
Although an accurate body count is yet to be ascertained, unconfirmed reports say about 18 people have been confirmed dead. Medical personnel at the various hospitals where the injured were rushed had their hands full.
Please, we need people to donate blood. Nigerians, if you can actually come to the National Hospital, just help go to the blood bank and donate blood for the victims, please. We don't want the victims to become casualties.
We have the patients and we are treating them. We don't want people to disturb our doctors and all the team that are treating them. I plead with you. The crowd is much. We are still receiving more of these casualties.
The Minister of State for Health, who visited the scene, also reaffirmed government's commitment to ensure that the victims receive proper Medicare.
ensure that as many lives as possible are saved. That's our focus, and I believe that my colleagues here, as well as what the federal government and justice, are working hard to ensure that we save as many lives as we can.
The United Nations authorities also condemned the attack, with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon describing it as unprovoked. Eyewitnesses said a car crashed through 2 security barriers and rammed into the building's reception before exploding. The Islamist sect Boko Haram, who had carried out a similar bomb attack on the police headquarters in Abuja in June, claims responsibility for the attack.
Welcome back. That report we just saw there. We will be asking our first question with the ladies first. We have Ms. Tanwa Ashiru, she's a security and defense analyst. Ms. Ashiru, 10 years after, Nigeria is still fighting insurgency. What are we not doing right?
Well, I honestly believe in this strategy, which means if what you're doing doesn't work, it's time to change. Exactly. And I know people are very averse to change. Change is hard and it's difficult. Pretty much what we're seeing is the same strategy being used over a decade, and we're not necessarily seeing any results from that. One of the key things that brought about the insurgency to begin with had to do with unemployment, a lot of young people who have nothing to do, and they got easily sucked into this belief and this myth, and that's what they're doing. Fast forward today, within 10 years, we've had such a population growth, population boom. And if we look at what the economy is doing and how people are being engaged, are they being employed, are they being educated, none of that is being focused on right now. And so we're still back in the same position.
So I'm just wondering if you're implying that, I mean, this is perhaps a repeat. And I don't know if you're implying that we're probably going to see something spring up again, similar to what we had over a decade ago, especially when it comes to Boko Haram. But I'd like to bring in Colonel Yomi Dare into this discussion. But that is when we return from this break, definitely. Sure. Just to get you, to bring in your thoughts, talk about our missed chances. I mean, 2010 up to this moment, it's been a long time. So join us again. Well, you're welcome back. Mrs. Tanwa Ashiru is still with us in our studio alongside Colonel Yomi Dare, retired. They both join us from our Lagos studio. And in Kano, Mr. Habusani, who is the Commissioner of Police in the state, joins us, as well as Mr. Joshua Alobo, the President Human Rights Development Center. He joins us from our Abuja studio. We're discussing security. Now, before we went on that break, I promised to come to Colonel Yomi Dare, retired. But just before that, Mrs. Tanwa Ashiru, you were talking about the strategy which has been in place, and you believe that strategy has not changed. So what is that strategy that you see has not changed?
A lot of it is actually still focusing on the military as the primary means of bringing about civil security. They are not the ones to do that. We should be looking at more of the police being involved. Another thing also has to do with the policemen, for instance. We've talked about community policing. The word has been thrown out there a lot. But is it really being truly practiced? What does that mean? It means that policemen who are involved in a particular community really should not be staying in the barracks. If you stay in the barracks, how should the people in the community even know who you are? How should they feel comfortable coming to you with information if they have information about things? So, I mean, there's a lot. We have a whole list of different strategies that can be put in place that can help them just change the wave of which the security is going right now.
So, Colonel Dare, do you agree that the strategy has not changed?
Well, I do agree with Tanwa to an extent. But again, like she did say that the military should not be, on the front. I mean, in the front of this fight. I totally got you right. Yes, you would have had the announcement or the pronouncement lately. I think about 2 days now, that the military will be withdrawing. From some of these areas where they've been involved in internal security. But one thing that we have to note here is that areas that are extremely volatile, what is policing? Policing is a situation whereby things are more or less, normal, and you expect, citizens, to respect the rules and regulations, and whoever faults any of those, and the police will come in, to address such, misdemeanor. So here we are talking about the war is still on. The war is still on. So as we speak, the war is still on. So what is interesting here is that, yes, it is interesting. There's a development that the police, is being, further or better equipped than they were before, which is good news. Okay, but at the same time, we must be guided. The military, I think, so far they are putting in some effort. Maybe within the military itself, there's need for some rejigging.
Right.
All right, let's go to...
That's my take.
All right, Colonel. Let's go to Mr. Abu Sani. He's a commissioner of police in Kano State. Mr. Sani, we know already that the military will be withdrawing from some of these hot zones, meaning that the police will take over. As a commissioner of police in Kano State, knowing how well equipped the force is, do you think the police is ready for this battle? Because it is still a battle.
It's a battle.
We have actually reassessed the current situation on ground and the available deployment, and haven't realized the importance of the joint task forces that are operating in the insurgency areas and some of the banditry areas. The withdrawal, per se, will be done after the proper assessment, and therefore any area that the police will take over the internal security as already will be mapped out. And we feel whatever it is with what we have on ground, we're able to take position properly with the support of the necessary equipment that will be available for us to operate. These are some of the issues that will be properly and intelligently assessed, so that we will know where and where. In fact, some of these withdrawals have started some years back, where we have taken position in most of the liberated areas. We have put our presence, and a lot of security deployments, particularly the police, have been in place, and we are good to go in these areas. And for the past 1 year, we have been properly positioned in some of the areas that have been liberated. These are some of the things that I feel we are ready to be on ground to carry out our internal security mandate.
Right. Now, speaking of that mandate, over the past decade, we have seen clashes, for the lack of a better term, between the police and the military. I mean, just a few months back, we saw a major one in Taraba State, which, I mean, we're still waiting for the outcome of that investigation. So the question is, in this war against insurgency, banditry, we find some of these clashes here and there. And I'd like to know, from your side, for the police, how is the relationship with the military?
Oh, anyway, I've not heard your last aspect, but I knew you mentioned the issue of what is our relationship with the military. The sound has been breaking towards the end, but if it is the issue of relationship with the military, it has been very, very perfect. And even in most of the commands that we have a forum of all security agencies, and the military have been.
Okay, I think we lost audio then. But while we reconnect, Mr. Abu Sani, I realized your reaction to the statement, to the question, I mean, his response saying that the relationship is good. And, you know, this is for Mrs. Ashir, because I know you are a part, or were a part of the system. But I'd like you to, from what you see, your outside view, what do you think the relationship is like?
Yeah, so the honest truth, we expect, you know, the police person representing his organization to say that it's perfect. I mean, he shouldn't say anything otherwise. However, we do know, even till now, especially in the intelligence circles, we know about this, and the security circles, they're not communicating with each other as much as they could be. When there are incidents, usually one person has information, they're hoarding it. We see it quite a bit. So it's not quite where it needs to be yet, and that's a major problem. One of the things that we say to help foster this sort of relationship, we try to tell them, look, why don't you hang out outside outside of work, social circles, play football together, get to know each other, so that when something actually happens, you know who you can call up in another organization and say, hey, I got this information about this. I heard, last time we spoke, you said you were looking for this. Perhaps it could help. And that's how you just foster information sharing amongst individuals, especially.
All right. Let's go to Dr. Joshua Alabo, who is in Abuja studios. The issue has been with the Islamic movement of Nigeria and the independent people of Biafra, people having their own views and opinions and arrests being made, not allowing people practice what they believe. Dr. Joshua Alabo, tell us what how do I say that? What are the rights? What's the limits or the limit to people's rights in Nigeria? If you want to, we're talking about assessments of human rights in Nigeria, what should be like a limit?
Okay, first and foremost, in as much as everyone has the right to practice his religion, but at the same time, in practicing your religion, you should not engage in any act of criminality with the guise of religiosity. That is the major aspect of the human rights angle vis-a-vis the various terrorist groups that have arisen. The fact that you are practicing your religion and there is no any infraction or breakdown of peace and order, there is no problem with the state. But once you go beyond practicing your religion or propagating the religion and you take arms against the state or try to breed the peace of other person, the state will of necessity intervene. And that is why Section 46 of the 1999 Constitution as amended talk about the derogation, that those rights in fundamental rights are not absolute. There are some instances on the interest of national security and public morality and defense. The state can easily intervene in some of the practice. If you look at the issue of Boko Haram, even though they started as a religious group, but ideologically, after a while, it was hijacked. And the purpose of being hijacked, it was well known, even though there was a political patronage, which was in the public domain, and happily, my master thesis was on Boko Haram, threat to national security and right to life. And if you look at the history of Matasini in the 1981-82 and the Boko Haram, they are almost in the same trajectory. That means that we have not learned much from our own past mistakes. When you see a religious body that has some extreme view, the security, like the Analyse in Lagos, have to monitor them and see where there is a deviation from the core religious belief to other element of criminality or to element of infraction. And if you look at the issue of Boko Haram, we do respect to even the police force or the security. They provoke the Boko Haram to the state that we have it. If they have not killed their leader that was captured by the military and handed over to the police, will not see the radical aspect of Boko Haram. We do respect. And at the same time, if you look at the Boko Haram now, it has gone beyond ideological aspect. There's a political dimension. There's economic dimension. Those that benefit because of the security vote are not even happy to resolve this security issue. We must tell ourselves the truth if we want to actually resolve the security crisis in Nigeria, because Nigerian people are quite peaceful. If you look at the federal SARS, they are overstretched. Nigerian security are working, but because of inherent vested interest in the system, we have not get it right. If we want to resolve our insecurity, especially like IPOR and the Boko Haram, is something that is very, very easy. I'm talking about IPOR too. You see, the rate or the way the government confronted IPOR, if they have done a repressal like the Boko Haram, it will even be calamitous. So we must be careful in as much as we want to check extremists, at the same time must be within the acceptable best practice that is recognized by the international treaty and even the Constitution. There are some attack on armed person beyond the proportion. He gathered a lot of sympathy at the end of the day that you think that people are not supporting the government. Right, so what I'm trying to say in the nutshell, I
want to, go. I want to ask Habu Sani, Commissioner of Police in Kano. I mean, you said they were provoked. Maybe Boko Haram or IPOB or anybody trying to give their opinions get provoked, and that is why they begin to react. Commissioner of Police in Kano, do you think that the police force provoked some of these individuals?
Hello?
Mr. Habusani?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly. Do you think that the police force actually provoked and caused some of these problems we have today, talking about insurgency?
Okay. I don't agree with the response of the human rights activists that has been there in total. If we look at the whole situation, he started with the issue of being provoked. It's not a matter of ideology alone. But at the end of his response, he went further to mention some of the factors that led to this. He mentioned about the economic factors, the other areas that he has actually highlighted. This, I don't agree that it was provoked. They have already formed their ideology. You know, something to do with ideology has to be something that one's believe in. And they have already made up their mind. The attack at the first instance was not because of any provocation by the police. But they have formed themselves, and then they went ahead and started the first attack. And that attack went in, and then from there, the other factors now set in. We have to equally look at the external factors, apart from the internal factors we have. These are some of the combinations of reasons that forget this particular insurgency activities, particularly in the Northeast. You know, we have international borders, and we have seen the various groups that have been fighting the subsisting government in those countries. We have seen and reviewed some of our relationship with some of these countries that have borders with us. We have equally been able to look at the whole situations and then see how realistic are these our neighbors helping us in the fight against insurgency. And the point in time, with the recent closure of the border, you have seen the level of improvement in the security situation within the Northeast. This underscores the importance of the way and manner some of these our neighboring countries relate with us. And if you look at the unemployment, that can only serve as a ready-made recruit for these people, because if they have their sources and how they are being sponsored, you know that we have issues of terrorism sponsorship, financing, which need to be equally looked at. And you have seen the activities of other terrorists that are within the sub-region. All these ones are areas that we need to focus and then reassess and see where we have to develop a policy that will deal with international and diplomatic considerations in some of these things that we're doing in the fight against crime and criminality. We should equally look at the activities of some of these Arab Spring and some of the things that happen in the North African countries, and where some of these people find their way. And then now that the world has been into a sort of level of degradation, and some of them find their way to join these people, not because they have a common ideology, but because they have issues to deal with, and they want to join in as criminals, and then they want to hide under the cover of this and carry out their destiny. This translates some of to the banditry that some of us are having in the northwestern states. And with what we have come in as police and the intervention we have taken and the community policing partnership that we have done has equally helped. You have seen that one in the Zamfara, you have seen it coming up in Katsina, you have seen it being in some of the states that are faced with these banditry activities. And this has made many of them to surrender and then even hand over their arms. All these things are things that we need to consider. Where some people form themselves into insurgency group, it may not be necessary that all of them are having common ideology with what we have witnessed in the Northeast. These are some of the things that I feel we have to look at and reassess and see where we focus and then deal with the situations holistically and be able to handle the matter appropriately.
Right. Now, perhaps another thing we need to look at is if we have gotten the right mix of the hard and soft approach in handling perhaps insurgent groups, groups that have dissenting voices, aggrieved groups. And, Colonel Yomidari, you have seen the way the government handled IPOB, IMN. I mean, some say that they weren't handled well. So the question is, have we gotten that right mix? And how should we handle these groups?
Well, lately, some school of thought came up with the idea that we probably should engage the Boko Haram people in dialogue. Okay? I think that's something that is worth looking at, even though we are strictly, taught that you don't negotiate with terrorists.
But haven't we been negotiating in the past?
Well, it all depends, It depends. It depends. It hasn't been, a kind of open negotiation, okay? And if you want to compare IPOB and Boko Haram, I think they are not the same, okay? Because IPOB, they are not masking, they move about and they say, look, this is what we want, this is what we don't want. And in IPOB's own case, is more of well, I was going to use the word secession, but even at that, because Boko Haram came and said, look, the actual meaning of Boko Haram is that we do not want education, Western education, but it's funny because the Boko Haram people, by the time you read their camps, what do you find there? You find drugs, you don't even find the Quran there. One would have expected that these are people that should be carrying the Quran close to their chest and everything. Most of the things you find there, are drugs, condoms, and what have you. Okay, so they are not really. I don't think they are propagating any religion. And of course, with their external, external allegiance and external source of funding, that complicates things again. But again, don't forget, back to what Tanwa said, which I also agree with her. One of the primary causes of this situation in which we find ourselves, especially with Boko Haram, is the country not getting its priorities right. Because one of our main focus should be education. Okay? When people are properly educated, you find out that most of these vices will be brought to the barest minimum. And of course, I believe that we are beginning to see some reason, some wisdom. And that's why right now you see there's a policy on Almanjari. Because the federal government has made pronouncements and they are really out to stamp out Almanjari. I hope you know what Almanjari is.
Yes, of course.
I remember you were talking about that during the break. I'd like you to tell us, what is the reality now? Yes, we know the NSA spoke about it, condemned it. Other governors have said, we need to get a handle on this. But what is the state now?
I should...
No, that's for her. I remember you mentioned it.
All right, so pretty much what we had talked about offline, I said when I was in Maiduguri, I found it still broke my heart. When I saw a lot of young children, a lot of them on the streets just carrying their bowls with nothing to do. And the one that really got to me was that it was around noon, so it was supposed to be a school day. It was like on a Monday. And they were there just on the streets eating food from the ground. It really hurt me. So what I was looking at is that, look, these are people, they're, 6 years old, 5 years old now. So 10 years later, they will be 15. I don't know if you have teenage nephews or teenagers in your family, but you know what they're like. They need to stay busy. If not, they can easily drift onto another side. So I feel, interestingly, I read through the entire national security strategy that was recently done by the NSA. And I must commend them. They were pretty effective in targeting or looking at all the different issues that we have in Nigeria and then proposing some form of solutions for them. Now, I saw it more as an advisory. So, it's one thing for you to give this document to a decision maker and say, here, these are all the problems, these are possible solutions, here you go. It's another thing for him to actually take that document, take out some of those solutions, put it on the board and say, okay, how do we actually tackle this? When the Commissioner of Police was talking, he said, oh, we have to look into this and look into that. They've all actually been looked into already. We all already have a strategy. It's all about the implementation. How do we go in there and start tackling things one by one? The Colonel is right. Education is very key. And we're not just talking about education that will make people come and just start, speaking big grammar. That's not what we're talking about. And it doesn't always have to also be books and formal education. What about skills? What we have is a large number of youth who are unemployed, but the truth is they are unemployable. Because even when you want to employ them, even when foreign companies, companies want to come and say, employ the young minds here, you can't actually go with them because their English is poor or whatever. They're not really contributing. And there was something that that was mentioned in one of the reels that you had going, where the lady, she said something about, Nigeria is suffering from a problem of low revenue. How do you have over 200 million people, and yet we're not productive enough to actually bring enough money into the country? And that's what we need to look into. So if people ask me, what is a possible strategy? How should we try to change this, especially with regards to security? As much money that's being pumped into security, I get it, I understand, defense, weapons, they need all of that. But let's also consider education as paramount to our national security.
All right.
Another issue that also came up was you talk about national security and, the rule of law, personal human rights. And this formed a major, controversy during the past few months. And we remember the detention of certain individuals against court orders. And that's something I'd like to take, Dr. Aloba on right after this break. I really hate to do that. But we need to go on this break. And when we return, we'll get him to respond.
Sure.